Hi, everybody. Super excited, especially today on another Friday, to be here with Salim. Salim and I go quite a way back. We met through Alan Laubsch, and when we were trying to save the planet and working on really re-innovating, tokenizing the world, it really was, right? Really, all those efforts, what does it take to really protect the planet and tokenize and create value of what the planet generates? But Salim has an amazing background, an author of a phenomenal book, which I implore all of you to read. Sort of a big educator, an entrepreneur, done a whole bunch. But rather than me tell you about him, I'll ask him to sort of maybe Salim. Great having you on here. Thanks for taking the time out, and maybe you want to introduce yourself as well.
All right. Thank you, Stefan. Great to be here.
Yeah.
I'm super looking forward to this conversation. My background, I'm from India originally, schooling university in Canada, 10 years in Europe, restructuring large companies, many French companies, which is why I'm bold, and many of you Europeans will understand that. And then the last 20 years in the US, I built the predecessor to Twitter 2 years too early. Very bad to be early in the tech space, better to be late. But it got me well known, and probably the journey in this context starts at when I was the head of innovation at Yahoo, when Jerry Yang was CEO, and learned a fundamental lesson, which is that when you try anything disruptive in a legacy environment, the immune system attacks you, and you get caught fighting all these antibodies because large organizations are geared for efficiency and predictability, and the world just isn't that anymore. And so there's a whole conversation to be had about the future of large companies. Which I don't think they have one. Anyway, I went from doing that to building out Singularity University, where I was the founding CEO and built it out for about 7 years, and wrote the book Exponential Organizations on how do you scale an organization as fast as you can scale technology. That been basically, I've been chasing that around and going around talking about that for the last few years. And we actually set about solving this immune system problem. And we've actually done it. We've created process frameworks that allow you to go into a big company or a public sector environment and hack culture at scale. And so that's a lot of the work that we do with our ecosystem. We now have a community of consultants that work on this, use these tool sets. There's now about 17,000 people in 130 countries. And so we're creating kind of an army that can help with the transformation of the world in general.
And I think some of the things that you address in your book is the exponential, how technology helps exponential growth and how information as a result also translates and transfers around the world. Where do you feel, sort of in that nature, big organizations, big monolithic organizations, WHO, you've got UN, you've got, DC, Brussels, CCP, on the other hand, you've got all these huge organizations that have sort of lost touch with the pulse of what's really going on the floor. How do we change that? And how does technology help them? And what does new government look like or new institution look like?
Well, I think that's a great comment and important in the context of this. We run the world today with a set of top-down, centralized, hierarchical pyramid type structures, right?
Yeah.
The UN, the WHO, the CCP, etc. And that's great for a scarcity world. It's great for a world that doesn't change very much, and you can kind of navigate the world. I go back to the scarcity just because of big command and control inherited from the military works really well in that world. But as we move the world to abundance, abundant energy is around the corner now, abundant crypto, etc. You need a different model. And over the last 20, 30 years, we've seen the rise of the internet, Burning Man, the open source movement, the maker movement, DAOs, etc., that are bottom-up environments. Because there's a tsunami of technology breakthroughs that's sweeping away the old, that are very anti-fragile. And we need a completely new model to go forward. And I don't see any of these old structures making it. We can see them breaking in front of our eyes in this new model.
Yeah, and I think that's, obviously, I think that's what we're building for, right? And your new venture is really building out for that, right? And you've launched EXO, which is on the blockchain, leveraging your experts in the field across, I think, the 130 countries you mentioned, the 17,000 consultants. And I think you're really working with local jurisdictions and cities. And one of the terms I think you come up with is city nations, right? What's that looking like, and how are you taking EXO into that new realm?
Yeah, so if I lift up the highest level, there are kind of four major observations we have about the world, right? The first is that we have 20 what I call Gutenberg moments hitting us at the same time. The printing press in the 15th century changed the world completely, and we call that a Gutenberg moment. Well, solar energy changed the world completely. Blockchain changes the world. AI, autonomous cars, CRISPR. Each one fundamentally changes the nature of society at a macro and micro level. In the face of those 20 breakthroughs, I think every institution by which we run the world essentially disappears and evaporates. We can't find an institution that's set up to navigate this. I'll just use education as an example. All our global education systems are trained to take a young child up through their early 20s and teach them to be ready for the job market, basically. And we don't know what a job looks like in 5 years. What are we teaching them? And so that's just one small example, but it goes across the board. The third observation is our current leaders clearly cannot navigate this. They're all trained in 20th century status quo incremental environments. And the final observation is that almost all the action, certainly implementation, is happening at a very localized level. We're going from nation states to managing the world via city states. When you think about Trump or Brexit, it wasn't left versus right. It was urban versus rural, right? And you look at the pandemic, all the big countries did pretty badly navigating the pandemic. All the smaller countries did really well because you have homogeneity, you can move a population along. Where the world is volatile and moving quickly and changing quickly via these 20 Gutenberg moments, you want localized adaptability. And so how do we navigate that in the future? We do a bunch of work around city, transforming public sector, city environments. So we did a big project with the mayor of Miami a few years ago and laid down a lot of the vocabulary you hear coming out there. So we found a way of navigating and breaking through and transforming localized public sector environments. And then let's spread that so that anybody has that tool set to be able to apply it locally. I think it's if you talk to the Neil Fergusons and Yuval Hararis of the world, right? You look back, every civilization in history got to quite a sophisticated level. The Romans, the Incas, the Mayans, etc., hit a boundary condition and then literally fell off a cliff almost instantly, right? And you talk to the top kind of anthropologists and systems thinkers, we're kind of all the conditions are there now, and we're literally falling over the cliff right now. And what we're trying to do is, what are the systems we can build so that we can fail over more elegantly and not end up in 400 years of the dark ages.
And I think a lot of us entrepreneurs are building these new systems, right? And I think what I struggle with is really we've got a leadership in all of these countries that has no touch with reality anymore. It's like somebody was adding up, if Trump goes again and Biden will have to go again, because that's the only way these two can go. Then you have the two presidential candidates in aggregate, an age of 90 years, 180 years old or something. I mean, it's like, is that really
in terms of relevance to the new world? They might as well be 500 years old, right? There's like there's some bylaw that you have to be under 25 to program the blockchain. There's somebody asked me if I could change the Constitution in the U.S. and make one change, what would I do? I said, right now the Constitution says you have to be over 35 years old to be president. I would rewrite it and flip it around and say you have to be under 35, because you just 35. Can't understand the world when these poor guys have no hope of understanding what's happening, right? Like trying to get them to sit on a Discord channel and understand the chatter of any kind.
But the brilliance is the Discord channels are real-time, online, documented conversations that are happening, right? And they're naked truths.
I've gone deep into the NFT rabbit hole over the last 6 months, trying to understand what's going on. And I actually believe we're watching humanity fork. I'm seeing in these NFT projects a community and a culture where the language, ethics, values, monetary appreciation, behavior conversations is completely distinct from the real world and completely detached. It's the first time I've ever seen an environment where people, they treat money truly as abundant. Right? They're working their projects. They go, oh, we need some money. Oh, go sell some NFTs and come back and keep working. And you're like, what? Wait, what? The entire world operates with money as a scarcity, and these goddamn kids are sitting there going, "Oh yeah, we'll sell some over here and come back." And that is profoundly fascinating. Whether it's, there's obviously the excesses, there's greed and whatever, but I was talking to the head of innovation from the Federal Reserve, right? And she's saying, well, we have to do. I said, listen, I'm watching.
There is such a role.
There's such a role, it turns out. And she's really whip smart, because the Fed is a decentralized system of 13 regional federal banks, right? So they have just to kind of cat herd all of them. It's like trying to navigate stakeholders on a blockchain, right? We'll get to DAOs and governance in some other discussion, but I've lost my train of thought now. You sit in these, and they don't ever mention the US dollar in these channels. They're only ever talking about the unit of account has changed for this new culture. It's just utterly fascinating to me, and I think it's very powerful and unique and important what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to Laguna, our website, lagoon.na, NA, you'll actually see we have a whole video that talks about money and how money has shifted from this, piece of paper that gets printed into this, fast-moving consumer product, right? It's now trendy, it's fashionable. Because we can program money, e.g. NFTs, we can have so much involved in that, and it becomes, oh, damn it, I lost the money. Oh, man, I've got to go make it back, like you just said, right? And it's a fascinating, I just minted one yesterday. I got accepted into a DAO as, a member to a society, and I had to mint it, and it's 0.7 ETH, right? Okay, ETH is cheap now, so it's pretty good value, but you still have to mint it, and the price is ETH. It's not the dollar anymore. It's totally right.
Yeah.
And I think largely that has created this level of abundance and this thinking of abundance, right? It's like, and we're seeing the Fed has its own way of treating abundance, but it's trying to control the scarcity or the way that abundance gets set into the market. But and so they're also doing it, but in a different way, in a much more, sort of maybe stodgy way, if that's a word,
Well, they're trying to manage the macro environment on an old paradigm, right? I was talking to Jeff Booth, who wrote a book called The Price of Tomorrow. And that would be a book I'd recommend people to read, because he made the observation that over the last, about 10 years ago, we had about 50 trillion in GDP, and the world was about 85 trillion in debt. Roll forward a decade, even before the pandemic, and the world was 85 trillion in GDP, and we're now 200 trillion in debt. And basically, you worked out that over the last 50 years, every dollar increase in GDP globally is coming with it $4 of debt. Right, so we're basically increasing the world and moving the world forward by growing debt exponentially. And it's not like you can wipe it out. This is structural debt. You're essentially borrowing off future generations. Try going to a bank and saying, lend me $1,000 and I'll bring you back $250 and see how quickly you get shown the door, right? And yet that's what we're doing at the central bank level, and basically just print money to try and navigate the world. What he got excited about, and I think of Jeff as like the patron saint of the or the chief economist of the abundance world, right? And he made a really fascinating comment. He said Bitcoin gives you money velocity without debt, and you're like, wow, it takes like an hour to think about that. But that's a profound comment that we can now have. Because we wanted money velocity, so we created debt-based systems. When they created the monetary systems in the 70s and floated off the gold standard, they didn't realize that technology was deflationary. They thought the advanced technologies have always cost more, and then you can use the debt-based system if the underlying assets are becoming more expensive. Well, in a deflationary environment, you can't use debt because you essentially have nothing to operate off. There's no collateral. And the fact that technology is deflationary is driving everybody crazy now, and they just didn't understand. It was a natural error. They just in the history of mankind, advanced technologies always cost more. And today, for the first time in human history, advanced technologies cost very little. AI is pretty cheap. Solar energy is cheap. Sensors are cheap. The blockchain is free. And so that model breaks the debt-based system that we've built on for hundreds of years. And they're thrashing around trying to find what's next, which is why I think all of these experiments are so fascinating. I think your project at Truflation is really fascinating. So that we can actually track what's happening. I'd love to look into this more, but doesn't it turn out to be mostly price gouging by big companies that's driving a lot of the inflation? Right? They're like, this is great. Well, prices blame the government. We're golden.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of it, the largest portion, which is about 19% of people's household income, is transportation, right? We spend a lot of money on moving going shopping, food, whatever we need to do, flying here or there, and oil prices is obviously a huge impact on transportation, and so all our flights cost more. Our taking our children to school costs more, etc. And so. And guess who's announcing record profits, right? I mean, you just see that. I don't know if it's price gouging or if it's
they've shown it to
manipulated.
They've shown it to be pretty almost something like 80% of the money increase at the pumps is price gouging. Because they're like, oh, great, we can just pretend, and there you go. And they have kind of an invisible cartel where one of them doesn't undercut the other because everybody wins in that scenario.
Yeah, but I think it's just we're just seeing that people are beginning to, because the government is saying inflation is only 8%, but actually, or 7%. Actually, when I go to the gas pumps, it's like 20%. When I look at the trolley, the food cart at the end of a shopping session, it's half empty and it cost me $150, right? And so. Right. People are realizing that there's a big discrepancy, and that's creating a mistrust, right? And then all of a sudden, we have we'll just raise interest rates by 75 basis points. So it's like, hang on, I'm living below the level line. For me, everything is difficult already. How the hell am I? That's going to impact the leasing on my car. Is that going to impact my mortgage? Anyway, it's just really. And then you have on the flip side the NFTs, crypto, where I'm just programming new money, right? I'm bringing new money to market, trying to identify a new trend, and yeah, it's like such a different world.
Well, it's fascinating and for me completely exciting because we have innovation in the monetary system for the first time in probably 1,000 years, meaningful innovation.
Yeah.
And I was looking on one of the websites. We have 19,000 cryptocurrencies that are public right now. That's an insane amount. Now, this current dip will mean many of them will get wiped out. That's fine. But if 5 succeed, it'll change the world. And therefore, definitely. We're in an amazing place. I think of the comet has hit, right? And the dinosaurs are getting wiped out. And essentially, we're seeing this explosion of little furry animals, a Cambrian explosion of innovation, which we've never seen in monetary systems.
And I think that's happening. And you brought it, when we look at inflation, what has kept inflation down is really technology.
Yeah.
Because without technology, we would never have been able to bring down the cost so much, given the amount of money that's printed. And technology costs come down as innovation happens, big disruptive innovation, as well as economies of scale. So the greater the adoption, the unit costs come down and it becomes more affordable.
Yeah.
And you mentioned blockchain. Blockchain as an open source software is free.
Yeah. And
so ultimately, printing money has become free. It has become what the community puts value into that.
Well, there's two or three.
And how
there are 2 or 3 really important things in what you just said, right? Like a big one is the democratization of these technologies and the drop in cost. I'll just go back to this really important comment. In the history of humanity, advanced technologies have always cost a lot. And today, for the first time, advanced technologies are cheap. It means anybody can innovate. That means if Vitalik can get together with a few people and create a $500 billion ecosystem, I will submit to you that none of our world leaders can get their heads around an 18-year-old in a small group creating a $500 billion ecosystem, right? We can't cognate it. We literally can't process that data byte. And that's now going to, and you take Elon, who's just running amok. Now, Elon's methodology, by the way, is really simple. He will take a technology that's growing exponentially, solar energy, battery technology, etc. Where will that technology be on a 10-year doubling pattern because of exponential growth? And let's build a company to intercept that curve. That, whether it's neural links or whatever, that's all his methodologies. He's now inspired tens of thousands of entrepreneurs around the world to go, oh, I can do this. I can get the right mindset and just go for it. And this is going to change the world fundamentally. My favorite little example of this is there's the third fastest electric car in the world is called the Vega, 900 horsepower. Okay. Looks like a Ferrari. It's stunning. And it's being engineered, designed, built in Sri Lanka. Okay. That hotbed of automotive innovation. If you're a German car executive, you can't get your head around this. How can a bunch of fishermen on an island nation where they barely have roads be building this thing? It's not conceivable. It's not possible for that old world. And this is, I think, highlights the incredible discrepancy between the old and the new. And we need to move to the new as fast as possible.
Yeah. And I think I liked, Salim, I mean, you've got a huge experience, right? You're from India, you've lived in Canada, you've lived in the US, you travel the world all the time, and you have a really good perspective on the globe, right? We live on one planet, right? And I think, sort of you're seeing innovation happen not only now coming from the same city, Silicon Valley anymore, it's coming from all over, like these examples. And how has blockchain and Web3 really, and crypto really helped facilitate that? Do you see that really helping drive that further?
I think it's massive because, when an 18-year-old in Pakistan can just like buy some crypto and do some trading, right? It's unbelievable that this is possible. And so today, any kid can, with a brain, can learn the ropes around some possible potential idea, go innovate around it, and come up with something new. And many will fail, but I think of startups. The favorite paradigm I have to describe startups is turtle eggs. Turtle will lay 200 eggs on a beach, right? And maybe only 150 of them hatch, etc. You have 150 little turtles running towards the water, and the birds are eating them, the animals are eating them. Then they get to the water, the surface pounding them. Then they get into the water, and maybe only 50 get into the water. Now the fish are eating them. Only 5 get to the bottom, right? And this is why you lay 200 eggs. You just need those 5 to get to the bottom. A venture model is you can't tell which 5, so invest in a portfolio and hope that 1 out of the 10 that you invest in will get there. The key thing is that process is unbreakable. It doesn't matter how bad the external environment is. If you throw out enough turtles, some are going to get to the bottom and become big turtles. And that continues the process. We now have 1 million little turtles of cryptocurrencies running towards the water. Right, and there's no way you can stop that. It's going to change the world, and the question is, how do you navigate that bridge to the new world? And this is This is, I think, for me, the most exciting. All these experiments of crypto stable coins and NFT programmability and community building and energy on the blockchain, etc., are going to yield a completely new model. We can't see the other side of this. I think of like the internet in about 1995, but it's going to be incredibly magical. And we know that when these disruptive phases occur, what comes out the other side is always like 10x better than what we had in the past.
Yeah, and I think that sort of is in a way that sort of leads to where we're going, right? I mean, if you look at this innovation and this drive all over the planet. And to me, we created these new tech behemoths, right? And technology allowed us to create these Web2 companies that really innovated and changed the paradigm, brought down inflation. I mean, let's give them credit for that, on a business model that was really developed for advertising, right? They needed to generate revenue because growth wasn't good enough. You need to generate revenue, and sort of Wall Street dictated, go get revenue. And the way they did that was sell users' data, right? But they gave us a service for free. We gave them our data. And now I think that's all of a sudden shifting. And, if you look at the big innovators, they were all out of, sort of Silicon Valley or the US or Seattle or wherever. But how, in a way, regulatory frameworks are so important to foster innovation and retain job creation in a specific nation, right? And crypto land, I'm seeing, I've got people all over the world. I'm working with 60 different people around the world, and we've got vendors and partners that are building for us, some in the US, some around the world. So it's all of a sudden, it's become very distributed. How do you see that panning out, and how does that work with these big, I'm the IMF, it's like, you have to, or lawyers saying, oh, no, it's not in this jurisdiction, you can't work here, it's like, how does that play out?
I always try and boil things down to a reductionist, understandable metaphor, and then try and roll back out, right? So if I think of business, then the easiest way of boiling it down is demand and supply, and what are the characteristics of the demand and the characteristics of the supply, and you can kind of get your head around this, right? If you look at a country or taxation as a phenomena, you've got tax collection and then government spending. Right, that's your demand and supply. Our old models of nation states navigated this, and in siloed environments, right, you protect your nation's boundaries. You have an abundance of natural resources and critical mass in multiple industries, and that allows you to manage the nation state and protect that tax collection coming from resources or businesses that get created, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if you move down to the city-state level at one level, and you move to an abundance model on the other level, you have massive demand destruction, and the supply has to match in the same way. So I'll just use the example of energy. We've had energy scarcity for the entire history of humanity, right? Solar energy is an information doubling pattern on a Moore's law type path, doubling every 22 months, and it's been operating like this for 40 years. So for 40 years, every 22 months, we double the price performance of solar systems. Okay, at this pace, and it's been going like clockwork for 40 years. At this pace, we will be able to deliver all of the world's energy with solar in 8 years. We're 4 doublings away. Okay, and this is why Putin is going to war now, because in a few years, his oil and gas reserves are worth nil. So he has to act now because he doesn't have a choice. It's not hard to roll that carpet forward and go, okay. So I think oil prices end up at about $14 to $16 a barrel. And then they never go up from there, because like the last oil price crash in like 2013, 2014 was because of a 2% oversupply in the market. It's a highly tightly run market. Doesn't take a lot. So solar energy coming along with decentralized microgrids, et cetera, will completely blow that paradigm. Even if it's a 10% impact, it just changes the game completely. So this now unravels the entire model for energy scarcity into energy abundance. And the way you navigate abundance, every business in the world operates on scarcity. For 10,000 years, if you didn't have scarcity, you didn't have a business, right? And the reason we define exponential organizations and define the model is that we're seeing for the first time in history a set of business models tapping into abundance. So Airbnb is tapping into an abundance of extra bedrooms lying around. Uber, an abundance of extra cars sitting empty. If you own a car, it sits empty 94% of the time. And so we're seeing this shift from scarcity-based business models to abundance-based business models. Well, that breaks the taxation model, right? That breaks we have 200 fiat currencies that make no sense in a globalized world. Every country's like, we have to have our own currency to manage our own monetary policy, connect to asset-based environments, etc. No, none of that is required, especially in an information-based world where the world is moving in a different model. So the challenge, if you're the IMF, or the challenge if you're an oil company, or if you're any kind of large legacy organization, is you're trying desperately to keep the status quo. Well, you can't keep it if in the 80s and 90s there were about 5 or 10 solar companies being created a year because solar cost a bomb. So the big oil companies would just sit there and buy them and shut them down. Right? That was manageable. They could protect their hegemony using that model. Well, now because of the democratization, there's 5,000 new solar companies. You can't buy 5,000, and therefore solar is exploding in use. In the same way that once you have 5 million kids using Ethereum, you can't shut them down. You can't regulate it in any easy way. So therefore, there's going to happen. All the big governments and big structures are trying to do right now is slow it down as much as possible to extend their shelf life, right? And but the change in the flip is inexorable. It's a watershed moment of going from scarcity to abundance. And as we move to that shift, a new world will emerge, and we need to create the systems and the institutions and the monetary systems and the governance models that allow us to navigate that new world.
Yeah, because I think a lot of the population, or general people, in societies, are still very nervous. Everybody's nervous of change, right? And I think three things that I always look at people, very simplistic. They always want to be right? So they always want to have something confirmed, right? We inherently are lazy, right? So we don't want to take on too much work, and then lastly, we always want to blame somebody, right? So if we're not right, it's never my fault, right? It was that
very
fault.
Easy to do in today's world. Right?
So super easy to do in this world, right? Because I've got somebody that's constantly taking care of us and telling me what to do. They need my votes for me to get elected. So you've got to pay me to keep me happy. And I was right because I said something at some point, and I'm selected in my news channel with all my friends. I'm getting always the confirmation that I'm right.
Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler wrote this book Abundance 10 years ago. Okay, and they highlighted in there something very, very important that I think is the seed of this problem. They highlighted the role of the amygdala in our brain, which is a little walnut-sized organ in the back of your brain. It's an evolutionary mechanism that's constantly scanning for bad news. Okay, because when we were evolving on the plains of Africa, if you heard a noise in the bushes, you ran because bad news could kill you. You didn't wait around to see if it was your best buddy. You just took off because it's a tiger, it's a snake, it's whatever. Good news doesn't kill you. If I miss a piece of good news, I might miss some fruit that I could eat, etc. But if I miss a piece of bad news, you'd literally died. So our brains have evolved. The amygdala is scanning your sensory mechanisms, bypasses the neocortex. Okay. And it's constantly going, where is there danger, so I can tell the body to get going, spike cortisol levels, and off you go. And that model is what sustains. It turns out we're 10 times more likely to pay attention to bad news as to good news because we relate to it as danger. This is my thesis on why Fox News does very well, right? If you watch Fox News in the US, you're going to die this week because of a Mexican terrorist coming from
well, any mainstream media
the border, right? Or Jewish space laser, or God knows what. Okay. Peter calls CNN the crisis news network, right? Because when you can track every bank robbery in real time, high definition, streamed to 20 devices, you think the world is going to hell, and you vote on that. That can be weaponized. The social media amplifies the negative, and because we're 10 times more negative, pays attention to that. And now we get a Trump, or we get Brexit, right? Complete amplification of nonsense fear, but you can weaponize that. And we need to figure out as a species how to ride around the amygdala, and train ourselves not to respond to every negative thing that happens. Like for example, I'll give the autonomous cars, right? An autonomous car kills somebody and everybody freaks out. Ban the car. Just stop all development of autonomous cars because God knows people don't like to be killed by robots. We'd much rather be killed by drunk people, which is what's happening today, right? A million people a year die in car accidents around the world. And we're for the fear of changing. So my favorite commentary about human beings in general is that we'd much rather be comfortable than happy. And we're comfortable in the status quo. We understand it. The fact that half of us are dying for various things, whatever, that's okay. At least I get it, right? I've got to help you if you move into an abundance-based and free energy, cryptocurrency, UBI type of world. where okay, maybe it can't possibly work. I can't possibly, etc. There's no danger in that, and therefore we live. So there's the anatomical root, I think, of all of our problems.
Yeah, I mean that was actually something to just bring back a memory, right? Where people are happy to go back to something that they know what they get, right? They know the outcome. Whereas the uncertainty where they get something really good by the potential of just walking around the corner, around the block to find that coffee shop that does it, it's this exclusive coffee shop and they do amazing coffee. But oh no, I don't know what that coffee's like. Is it going to be really good or not? I've never been there before. But my corner shop, the guy that I always go to, I always get a good coffee. It's just off, pot of coffee. It's okay. It's okay. So it's comfortable versus actually something that could be better on the other end. I'll stick with the comfortable because I know it.
Dweck goes to the growth fixed versus growth mindset, right? And there's some people, and in the past we could use generational change to navigate this, right? Our lives are totally different from our parents and our grandparents, and our kids are having totally different lives. The problem is the metabolism of change is faster than our generations right now. Like any 10-year-old, Facebook is for old people, right? Like that just blows my mind. So it's moving so fast. I'll give a little anecdote that I think that highlights this. I've been, as a futurist, you kind of have to live this future to get a sense of it. So I've been driving a Tesla up and down the U.S. East Coast for over the last few years, Miami to Toronto and back, etc. And you get in the car, you hit the autonomous car driving mode, the car drives itself. Think about this. I get into this car, it drives itself 80% of the time. Okay, carries me across the country, and because the charging stations are free, the whole trip of 2,500 kilometers costs me zero. Okay, that is a Gutenberg moment. You can't you're like, hey. So I load up with 5 of my favorite shawarmas. I hit the button, I eat, I make 60 conference calls along the way. It's a freaking awesome experience, and it's free. It's just mind-boggling that this is possible.
Yeah.
So I connected, just as a joke, when on my last trip down, I connected the Alexa to the Tesla, and I was saying, Alexa, honk the horn, and in the car honks, right? Didn't notice my 5-year-old watching. No. Okay. So I'm down in Georgia somewhere, in the middle of nowhere. And I parked the car to charge it. I'm walking away. Car honks. I'm like, oh shit! Did I, forget to close the trunk? Etc. I look at the car. Everything seems fine. Walk away again. Car honks again. I'm like, oh my god, something's wrong. I got to call Tesla. I call my wife. Give me the support number. Something's seriously wrong. I'm in the middle of Georgia, etc. You don't want to be broken down in the middle of nowhere here. And my wife goes, Mila, get away from the goddamn Alexa, because 2,000 miles away, my 5-year-old is like, Alexa, honk the horn. And it's not conceivable to me that this is possible, right? I cannot get this around my head that a freaking kid from 2,000 miles away can make my car honk. That's the old paradigm. We just can't grok it. And that's why I think we should just take all of our global institutions, etc., turn it over to the 25-year-olds, and they'll figure it out. The rest of us get out of the damn way.
Yeah, figure it out, right? One of the things right at the beginning of the podcast you mentioned, and you were talking about, you launched a Twitter-esque product, right? And timing was a bit early, right? And so I think one of the things that we always realize is timing is really important in a lot of these startups, and for the turtles to make it to the bottom, I need to get over these hurdles. The population needs to be right. The current needs to be right to drag me out. All of those timing elements need to be aligned for an entrepreneur to hit the success buttons. One of the things you always worry about is from a blockchain. Realistically in crypto, there may be 20 million people worldwide that are really engaged in DeFi and NFTs and stuff like that. And that's still a tiny portion of the 8 billion people that are on the planet, right? And it's like, what do we, is the timing right?
So look, I look at it this way. If you look at the history of Bitcoin, right? There were a whole set of generations leading up to Bitcoin, eCash, eGold, digital gold models, et cetera, World of Warcraft money. All these kinds of models were being played with for a long time. People have been trying to create Bitcoin for about 30 years. in different forms. Okay,
Yep.
a digital currency that's not driven by monetary fiat policy. That's peer-to-peer money. Okay, because in the end of the day, the U.S. dollar is peer-to-peer money. It's just arbitrated by a central bank and a government that kind of centralizes the decision-making, monetary policy, etc. Well, people saw the problems with this in the 70s, and so they've been trying. The fact that Bitcoin succeeded was the fact that is an indication that you now have a new paradigm in place, and now you have that foundational layer laid down, and that initial venture has been successful. Now that path has now been burned, and thousands of people can go through the path. The tool sets are there. The ecosystems, there's enough developers that people understand it, et cetera, et cetera. It's unstoppable at this point once you break through. Okay, I think of it as an eggshell. If you're the fetus or the little bird trying to break through the eggshell, you're pecking away until you're strong enough. You don't break through. Once you break through, there's no going back, right? And I'll give one other biological reference here. Woodpeckers. Okay, the mother will drill a hole in the tree, go and grow the birds. Okay, and the bird at some point, the mother will literally carry the baby woodpecker chick to the outside to the edge and literally kick it out of the nest. Okay, and the literally thing falls all the way down because it's soft. It lands and it survives. It crawls up the tree, tries to get back in the nest, and the mother kicks it out again. Right, so the freaking little baby bird is like, "Hey, what the hell? I'm trying to get back to the nest here." It turns out that the head of the woodpecker baby cannot get bigger than the hole in the nest hole, otherwise it dies. Right, so the mother has to kick it out. So once you kick it out and it starts, it's out there. So there's no going back. And the mother has to know when to kick it out. Now, we've not been good at knowing when to kick these things into the world. It's been happening evolutionary. Bitcoin, Ethereum, I think, are the first woodpecker chicks that are out there, and they're surviving on their own. And they'll have lots of teething problems, like the whole scaling and engineer problems in blockchains. I think of those as engineering problems, not invention problems. Once we solve the Byzantine generals problem, there's no going back. And so I think this is a paradigm shift, an inflection point, whatever metaphor you want to use, a watershed. We are in a new world with new systems and new models, and we have to learn that new world. There's no way of putting the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think both you and I are pretty committed to this new paradigm and this new environment. But one of the things that sort of I always look at and sort of see is as we go down this path, it's really, just how do we get more momentum behind it? How can we get, we talk about this infrastructure, and I think you mentioned all the tooling is now there. Right. And I think the tooling has become way better. 5 years ago in 2017, when we had a big crash in the Bitcoin, or 2018 in the Bitcoin world, that was the last big crash. It's like it shook out a lot of different people. We didn't have the tools there. Right. We just had Ethereum come out. And then all of a sudden we had new tools come in place that strengthened the decentralization nature. We had AMMs come in, automated market makings, right, which led to a whole bunch of new products and services and etc. One of the angles is we have this Web3 infrastructure, this great Bitcoin and Ethereum infrastructure. And on top of that, in order to get people to adopt it more, we need the sort of Web2 user experience to leverage this amazing infrastructure, right? And that will then help drive adoption.
Agree. You need the use cases that are. So again, back to the when we've analyzed exponential technologies, right? It turns out they go through 6 phases of growth. You digitize, then you go into a very deceptive phase of development where people don't notice that it's happening. Then you have a radical disruption of the status quo. And then you have demonetization, democratization, dematerialization. Okay, so Peter identified this paradigm as 6 Ds. And one of the key questions is, how do you go from deceptive to disruptive? And when we analyze technologies that make that gap crossover, it turns out to be usability. Steve Jobs made the smartphone usable, and boom, it took off, right? Bitcoin wasn't really usable until Coinbase created a nice interface to buy and sell. But that's the only thing you could do with it, is really buy and sell it, right? We're still looking for the user experience to make this seamless and usable in a macro level to the general consumer. But we have now a whole bunch of little use cases like art and NFTs and community memberships and other things where the experience is rough, right? Trying to navigate a MetaMask wallet on a nano ledger while trying to deal with your Bored Ape is a non-trivial exercise. So I've got one of the top NFT guys as a Sherpa for me, right? Who's just unbelievable. And so I literally grabbed him and said, mouse click by mouse click, show him how this works. So I've got like a Bored Ape and a bunch of NFTs, etc. And one day my Ledger wallet, just like, I can't see anything on it. And I'm like, shit, did I lose everything? Panic, whatever. And he's like, oh, just reinstall the software or do this or do this or do this. So I have to, and I'm a techie. I'm pretty clicked in. Literally, you have to go to the metadata and refresh this, or you have to rerun the smart contract. It's completely non-obvious to me. Somehow we recover the stick and everything is fine. But that user experience is not there yet. But there will be enough work being done, and the cost is low enough that enough people are working at it, that this is now this is not an if now, it's a when. It's going to happen, right? And as Bitcoin kind of becomes more pervasive, and this is where Jeff Booth, I think, comes into play. Because we've been growing the existing monetary systems with debt, at some point that collapses. And when that collapses, Bitcoin essentially becomes the reserve currency of the world. And it can't not happen because that old model just does not work for what's coming in the new world with a decentralized, low-cost technology world. So the only question is when, but the first threads have now been laid of that spider web where you can now build, just to throw another crazy metaphor into the table, we can now build, once you have the first couple of bridges into that new world, we can now build on top of that.
And we're already building on that, right? I mean, you're seeing big nations like El Salvador, sort of launch their own, go up against big institutions to say, we don't want this. I just read Brazil has announced that they're having some of their reserve in Bitcoin, and you're seeing other, Michael Saylor has obviously gone out there, and I think the most public figure to try and build a balance sheet with Bitcoin. So people are beginning to go down that path already.
And it's unstoppable because the cost of entry is low, right? So people are going to try experiments, and it's just some of them are just going to work. So it's a done deal in my head. There's no going back. And the existing system, every single time we print more money to deal with a pandemic or absorb more shock, that just accelerates the cycle into this new world. We just have to build anew as fast as possible. And it freaks the hell out of, you talk to any banker and they get hives when you talk about Bitcoin. They literally freak out. And we have to kind of navigate that. We've been working on the cultural tools so you can stop the immune system from attacking new ideas. And that's the work we've been doing, because if you can't stop the legacy from attacking these new little fledgling birds, then you don't progress.
Yeah, and I think, the one thing is I talk to a lot of, like you, I think we all talk to a lot of banks, and they're trying to figure out a way, how do I control this? How do I play in this? What is my role in this new future, right?
There, right? The banks, the Fed, the legal structures are all trying to figure out ways of controlling it, okay? And the entire paradigm is based on non-controllability. The reason Bitcoin is successful is it's not controllable by a centralized entity. If you do have it controllable by a centralized entity, it breaks it. So this is a complete philosophical shift, and our old folks can't get their heads around this. Love them to death, Grandpa, but you cannot get your head around a world that operates in this new way.
Yeah. And it'll be, and just sort of taking that to another level, right? I mean, if we look at these currencies and NFTs and new models and these new paradigms, right? One of the new paradigms that when we met in Miami, we were talking, you had a whole group of people around you that were NFT builders, right?
Yeah.
They were working in the metaverse, right? There was a whole new category of entrepreneurs building in the metaverse. So these were designers, right? These were architects that were designing property, real estate in this new land, right? So that's a whole new paradigm that's evolving, right? And these are decentralized worlds that are not governed by a jurisdiction in one country or another.
Example, right? Let's note that people have been trying to build a metaverse type structure for ages. Second Life being the most obvious of those. Philip Rosedale is one of our advisors. He's seen this game over the years, and trying to time the marketplace very hard. You just go to your passion, you try and build out, and you kind of get where you get to. I think even now Metaverse is a little early, just because the user experience is non-trivial, the avatars are a little clunky, et cetera, right? But at some point in the next 2 to 3 to 4 years, the resolution of the metaverse environments will get to close to that of the human eye. And now at this point, we already have art that you can distinguish from a real person versus an AI that's generating the art. And we have buildings in the metaverse that used to have to be handcrafted, and now AI is building the buildings, right? So we'll get to a point pretty quickly that this is why Elon believes that we must be living in a simulation. So as far as I can see at the macro level, we're heading straight to Ready Player One, where you'll have your little hovel and you'll have your suit and your headset, and you'll be living in that metaverse. You look at any kid in a device or any kid in a gaming environment, that's their life. Their Minecraft world is more real to them than the real world, right? Everything in the real world is just an excuse so they can get back to Minecraft or World of Warcraft. And there's some really fascinating real world spin-offs from this. For example, the MIT Media Lab did a study and proved that the best leadership training in the world about 10 years ago was World of Warcraft. That's the best leadership training in the world, was playing World of Warcraft, because to manage a guild and to get people that you don't even know to work together, your leadership skills have to be honed to the most ridiculous level. And so at the end, they would hire people based on the World of Warcraft level. And it was amazing. So we're going to see this bridge over into the real world. And again, we're early in the usability of it. It's not that obvious. There's no way anybody over 50 can get their head around Decentraland, right? Like, you just can't. Whereas for a 25-year-old, they're like, this is their reality. Okay. And this is an age-old paradigm. I mean, when we were growing up, we were on the phone with our friends as teenagers, and our parents were like, what the hell are you doing on the phone? Get off the damn phone, go outside, whatever. But that's much more real than this. And it's all of it is shrinking of time and distance, making it more abundant. And technology, there's a little thesis that Ray Kurzweil puts out, which is that technology has always been a major driver of progress. It actually might be the only major driver of progress we've ever seen. Now we have a dozen technologies moving at a doubling pattern: neuroscience, biotech, crypto, autonomous cars, sensors, energy, etc. That the positive upside of that is infinitely amazing compared to the alternatives. And so there's reason in that sense to be incredibly optimistic about where the world is going. It's somewhat times hard to see it in the middle of war and inflation and whatever, because these old systems are creaking now. At some point they'll just break, and we need new systems at the localized level to take over.
Super excited to be here. It's the best time to be alive. Salim Ismail, super good talking to you as always. And, really thank you for your time, your insights, great books to pick up on, great quotes, great thought leaders to track down, and you engage with them all the time. So really happy to have had that input to the super excited audience here. And, Yeah, where can they follow you? How can they read up about you and sort of find out?
It's free to join. And this is the conversation we have amongst our 17,000 people on a nonstop basis. And we provide tool sets for people to manage and bridge into this new world. And my Twitter handle is @Salim Ismail, and that's pretty easy.
Awesome.
Great conversation.
Thank you for your time, Salim, and it's really good always talking to you. Yeah, thank you.